If you're thinking about buying vacant land to build on, how do you finance it, and what are some things you should consider? We'll talk about that up next. Hey, what's going on, friends? Dylan Donaka here with the Buy Big Island video blog, and I got a request to do a video on buying vacant land, things to consider, ways to finance it. So we're going to do that. So the first one is, how do you finance it? If you don't have cash to pay for vacant land, what do you do? And you basically have three options. You can do a land loan, which is basically a loan on that vacant piece of land. Normally, most programs, a lot of lenders offer that program now, but those programs require between 25 and 30% down. So you got to have a pretty big chunk down in order to qualify for a land loan. There are no low percent down or 0% down land loans. And then the second way is to do a construction loan. That's a little bit more complicated. You do need some money down. You do need to talk to a lender about the intricacies of that. But you basically got to have house plans drawn. You got to have permits pulled, and then you can close on the loan. So a lot of times it's a 90+ day process in order to get a construction loan at a minimum. And so that's something that you got to consider when making an offer, and a seller has to consider whether or not they want to take that property off the market for that long in order to allow you as a buyer to go through that process and potentially not get approved or have issues. So a construction loan is a little bit more complicated, but that's one way to do it. And then the other way is to owner finance it. And this happens pretty common here in Hawaii, where the owner of the vacant piece of land acts as the bank and finances that piece of property to a buyer in order to give them a couple of years to get their construction plans in place and the house built. And then once the house is built, they can refinance that property into a normal conventional mortgage, because land loans can be more difficult to get. In that case, most times you do need a good chunk of money down, because the seller is going to have to pay closing costs, and they're going to want some security over that property that the buyer is going to actually pay them back. So they're going to want 30, 40, 50% down a lot of times. So you still have to come up with some money up front, but then they can finance it for 3 to 5 years and give that buyer a chance to finish up their plans and get their loan or their construction in place, and then refinance it into a conventional mortgage. So those are the three main ways that you can finance vacant land. Then some other considerations when you're going to buy vacant land, because a lot of people will call and ask, hey, I want to buy a vacant piece of property and build a house. What's the average cost per square foot to buy a home? And we can give them a ballpark figure on what that is, but that is really one small piece of the puzzle in terms of construction and building on vacant land. And there are a lot of other considerations that you want to think about cost-wise outside of just the cost per square foot to build the house. And so the first and most important one is utilities. So if utilities are important to you and are they available, that's one thing that you want to check. What is the cost to bring electric to where you want to build the home if it's a large piece of land? Or sometimes we have a thing called an SSPP, which is an assessment that the power company does on older subdivisions where they install the power lines, didn't charge the owners, and then when you actually go to build, you have to pay an assessment. It can be $3,000 to $5,000 in order to hook up to the electrical grid. And that's one thing that you want to look at cost-wise if that's the case. If you got to bring in power poles to get the lines closer to your property, that can be a pretty substantial cost. So electric is a big one. Is it available, and then what does it cost to actually hook up to it? And then there's water. Sometimes water is available, sometimes it's not. If it's not available and you got to do catchment, cool, you can build a catchment tank, which is an additional cost to your construction. But if water is available, you got to find out what does it cost to put a water meter in. If you're above where the line is elevation wise, do you need an elevation pump or a holding tank and things like that to have the water get to your property? Lots of different considerations there that you want to check on also, where you could have some significant costs. And then wastewater. Now you can only do septic tanks. You can't do cesspools anymore. So you want to see what the cost of a septic tank would be. Or in some very rare cases in the Big Island, you can't hook up to the sewer, and you want to know what those costs are. So those are all infrastructure costs that you want to check on and make sure you're aware of before you go to build. Some other significant costs can be the cost of grade. The Big Island is a steep island, and a lot of times you have to do some terracing, you have to do some filling, maybe a retaining wall in order to build on the property or build the way that you would like to build on it. So that's something to consider, is what kind of grading and foundational work do you have to do in order to build your home. Access is a big one. Is there a driveway? Do you need to put a driveway in? Is it going to be a long driveway that you have to pave? That can be tens of thousands of dollars in order to put in a concrete or asphalt driveway. So that's a big one too, is access to where your building site is, that can be an additional cost. And then on top of all of that, then you can look at the specific cost of build. So there's a lot of considerations before you buy a piece of vacant property that you want to look at and make sure you do your due diligence on, so you're not overpaying, because the cost of property per square foot per acre can vary vastly, and people can ask, wait, how come these properties are not very far apart, but one is twice as much as the other one? Well, that one may have all the utilities in, the lots may be graded and may be ready to build on, as opposed to one where you have to do all that yourself, and you add those costs in, you get to the same kind of price per square foot or price per acre on both lots. So there's a lot to consider there. If you have any questions about a specific piece of property that you need help looking at and doing some due diligence on, happy to help with that. But as always, let me know if you have any questions or comments below. Please subscribe and like the YouTube channel, and like the Facebook and all the other social posts. I always appreciate that. And I'll see you guys next week. Aloha.